Welcome to the Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy podcast, where we explore diverse topics, welcoming different number of guests, including diplomats, experts, and researchers, discussing global challenges and specialized topics in the areas of economics, policy, culture, technology, and more. With us today in this episode is Dr. Sara Chehab, Senior Research Fellow at the Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy, with her presenting as Shamad Dabal, Section Head of the Continuing Education Department. Hi, Dr. Sara. It's a pleasure to be sitting here with you today to talk more about the very interesting insight titled Women Empowerment and Gender Balance, Soft Power Tools in UAE Foreign Policy. It was a very interesting read, Sara, and it's a pleasure to be able to sit with you here today and talk more about it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma, for having me on the podcast, and I'm glad you enjoyed the paper.
Yeah, I can't wait to dive into the questions. So let's start with the first question. So, Sara, could you start by telling us or explaining more about the historical context of UAE women, specifically those working in the diplomatic corps, and how does that scene look like today comparatively?
Great question, Shamma. Thank you. Look, when we're looking at women in diplomacy in the UAE, what we need to realize is that this is something that we need to contextualize, right? And we need to look at it by looking at the status of Emirati women in general in the UAE, and not just women who are working in diplomacy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or MOFA. Because we consider MOFA to be a natural extension of whatever initiative is happening in the wider country. So when you have women who are economically empowered and politically empowered, when you have women who are very educated, who are pushed into the labor market, obviously they're going to want to work everywhere, including the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And the fact that, Emirati women are very educated, so 96% of Emirati women are educated, and they make up 70% of the university graduates that are graduating every year from the country. Given that, they occupy almost half of all leadership positions within the federal government, so I believe that statistic was 41%. And that, a lot of the public sector jobs are currently occupied by Emirati women. So when it sort of becomes natural for them to be in the field. So when you look at, for example, the UAE cabinet, and you see so many women who are currently ministers, when you look at the Federal National Council, the legislative body of the UAE, and 50% of the seats at the FNC are actually allocated to women, you realize that, this is a country that takes political empowerment very seriously, and women empowerment in general very seriously as well. So diplomacy becomes, a viable career choice and a viable career option, and an attractive one for a lot of women. So women have always been applying to MOFA. The first UAE women ambassadors were appointed in 2008. And since then, when you look at the number of women ambassadors that the UAE has appointed, it's been, an upward trend or an upward trajectory. And this is very encouraging. So instead of the historical context of this, I would sort of look at the domestic context. And, when we look at education levels, when we look at labor force participation of women, when we look at all of these things, it sort of, it becomes very obvious to us that, if women are working everywhere, then obviously diplomacy is going to be one of their career options.
So with all of the changes that have happened throughout the past few years, how has UAE positioned itself today, regionally or even globally, in terms of female representation in its diplomatic corps?
Okay, so I just wanted to throw some numbers out there.
We love numbers.
Okay, great. Just to let you know, so for example, as of September 2023, because that's the latest data that we have, it's from September. the UAE has two women ministers of state for foreign affairs, Her Excellency Reem Al Hashimi and Her Excellency Noor Al Kaabi. But in addition to them, the UAE now has 10 women ambassadors, 2 permanent representatives posted in key states and missions, 1 consul general in New York City, 8 women deputy chiefs of missions, and there are 2 women who are currently serving as assistant ministers inside the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or what we call MOFA. Now, inside the ministry, the staff is very much close to being gender balanced because 46% of the staff is actually female. And within the ministry itself, you have 19 women who are currently serving as department directors or deputy directors. So it's a very balanced, sort of staff inside MOFA, and we're seeing more women being posted abroad, and that is obvious when you look at the more senior posts. So I think. And given that, the first 2 women ambassadors were posted for the first time abroad in 2008, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is very good progress. So we assess that progress by looking at the history of it. So we know that in 2018, which is when we first started tracking these numbers at the Diplomatic Academy here, we know that in 2018, 7% of the UAE's ambassadors were women. Today, that percentage is at 12.5. So that's a 5.5 percentage point increase from 2018 until today. That's very good. That's because massive, this means, exactly, because this means that every few years you're appointing more and more and more women. So we can expect, if this trend continues, obviously, that in maybe 10 years or so, that we will have a very balanced, diplomatic corps at the more senior ranks. So the UAE is doing really well, especially when we look at it from, a slightly historical perspective. Now, if we compare it to the rest of the region, and by region, I obviously mean the Gulf region, the GCC region. It's also in the lead in terms of having the highest number of women ambassadors appointed and the highest percentage share of women ambassadors appointed. And that's very good. Another thing to mention is that the United Arab Emirates is the first country to have adopted a national action plan for women, peace and security, which it has adopted in 2021. And it's, ahead of the region, of the other countries in the region to have done so. Now, if you zoom out a little bit and look at the Middle East and North Africa region, the UAE comes currently at number 4. So we know, for example, that Jordan, Morocco, and Lebanon have a higher share of women ambassadors. Again, we're using 2023 data from earlier this year, and the UAE comes at number 4. So that's not a good position to be in, given the country's, I would say, given that it's a very young country, and it's definitely taking the right steps and moving in the right direction with these numbers and these percentages getting higher and higher every year.
So, Dr. Sara, you've mentioned that since the monumental appointment of the first female ambassadors in 2008, the UAE has been in a very positive trend towards a more gender-focused foreign policy, I'd say.
Yeah.
So can you explain more or talk more about the key drivers that have led to such a change or a trend?
Okay, so, the first obvious one is that, we're recruiting more women. So we are recruiting more and more women to become trainee diplomats, and more women are graduating from the Diplomatic Academy and joining MOFA. And I think this is a key factor that has led to more women being part of the ministry. When 60% of your trainee diplomats who are graduating every year are women, you are going to see higher numbers of women being full-time staff at MOFA, right? And with time, once these women start to be promoted, you're going to see them at more and more senior ranks. So I'd say that one of the most important driving factors is the fact that, we have, started, and this is something that has been there since 2016, 2017. We have focused a lot more on making sure that the trainee diplomats that we are hiring, that we're trying to get, that there's a gender balance there. And we are trying our best to make sure that, women are well represented at the junior level, and hoping that with time, this will be reflected in the more senior ranks. So this is, I think, one of the first driving actions. Now, in the paper, I also make the argument that, the representation of women in UAE diplomacy has happened in parallel with a foreign policy that became more and more focused on women empowerment globally in general, and on supporting the Women, Peace and Security agenda, or what we refer to as the WPS agenda. So when you have that, when you're focused on having your foreign aid and your humanitarian assistance, when you focus on a lot of that going to, let's say, supporting women all around the world, whether, they're suffering from gender-based violence, or whether they need, for example, training in agriculture, or whatever it is. So when you have a sort of women first foreign aid strategy, which the UAE does, plus you have a very strong commitment to the WPS agenda, both domestically and through your mission at the United Nations in New York. And when you have a sort of very, deliberate and very active recruitment policy to make sure that you are recruiting women, I think that all three taken together make for a very positive driving force that make diplomacy a very attractive career option for women.
It's making it attractive for me at the moment.
Well, you're more than welcome to join.
One of the things that I found interesting in the insight, Dr. Sara, is that you argue that gender parity at the senior ambassadorial rank has yet to be achieved, and that there are currently several challenges and concerns that actually affect Emirati women diplomats' ability to reach top posts. So you mentioned that it wasn't hard to attract women to join the diplomatic corps, but that it's difficult rather for them to reach top posts. So can you highlight these main challenges?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right, Shamma. We don't have an issue at all with recruiting women. In fact, I would also argue that we have the opposite problem, which is we have issue recruiting enough men to diplomacy, right? Because of our entry requirements being rigorous and sort of, emphasizing, good academics and a good English level. And so, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that men, are not educated or don't speak good English. That's not what I'm saying. But for some reason, it's been, easier to recruit women into this career. So yes, at this stage, at the more junior level, there's very little cause for concern. And I would say that, we have a fairly gender balanced and gender equal diplomatic corps at the junior level. That balance, though, disappears the higher up you go. And when you look at the most senior diplomatic post that you can have, which is the post of ambassador, that's when you realize that women are a minority, and that the majority of ambassadors are actually men. Now, it's very important to keep in mind that this is not a UAE only problem, by the way. This is a global problem. Globally, there aren't enough women ambassadors. So women at the moment occupy around 21% of all global ambassadorial postings. So women everywhere are a minority when it comes to, the most senior ranks in diplomacy. This is not something that's unique to our region. This is not something that's unique to the UAE. This is a global problem. Women in general are underrepresented. And you'd be surprised, and I'm sure from, talking to a lot of women everywhere, that they face very common challenges, and they have very common concerns, whether we're talking about an Emirati ambassador or a Swedish ambassador or a Canadian ambassador or a French ambassador. They will all tell you the same thing, right? They will all tell you that they have very similar concerns. And I think the first one is spousal employment. If you're an ambassador and you're married and you get a call from your foreign minister telling you, pack your bags, you're being posted to, I don't know, Finland. That's obviously, it's not going to happen that quickly, but, you know, just for the sake of the story. And your husband is in a very, you know, good job, and he has his own career and he has his own life. And you tell your husband, you know what, I'm being posted abroad and I have to move in 2 months and the kids are coming with me. What would that do for your family dynamic, right? I mean, this is not easy on any kind of family, whether you're a diplomat or not. And so we haven't yet found a solution, and some countries are working on it. So some countries do offer support for spousal employments and sort of, you know, and support for a smoother family integration while abroad. But we haven't figured that out yet completely here. And this is very important, because what is the alternative? You split the family, your husband stays behind, and you travel abroad and you take the kids with you, and then your kids don't see their dad. That's not ideal, right? I don't think that any mother or any father would actually want this. And so that's a very common concern. What do you do if, you know, your husband does not join you abroad? How does that impact your family dynamic? And by the way, this is a very big reason why, you know, a lot of women leave diplomacy, because they don't want to have to make that choice, and they don't want to be in a position where their family life suffers because of their career choice. So this is I think, you know, key. And I think that if we figure out a solution and concrete policies that address this concern, we will see less women exiting diplomacy and more women actually staying on, you know, and wanting to be promoted to the senior ranks. So that's a challenge. I think another challenge is, you know, the lack of mentorship and the lack of coaching. I don't think that we address women's concerns enough through whether formal or informal coaching sessions or programs or what have you. And sometimes as women, perhaps we feel more comfortable talking to other women about our concerns, our questions, and these programs are not there. They're simply not there. So if you happen to have a very supportive director or manager or boss or friend, yes, that sort of mentorship or coaching can happen naturally and informally, but there's no formal mechanism to help women navigate, you know, these challenges and to help them stay on and not leave. So we need to know, and we need more data and we need more research to understand why diplomats are leaving. So why isn't diplomacy an attractive career option after you've been there for a while? Why are diplomats, you know, not everybody obviously, but we need to figure out some retention challenges. Why are people leaving? Why do they think that other jobs are perhaps more attractive? What is it about diplomacy that's not making them stay on for too long? This is a question that needs more research and it needs more data, and we need to really focus on that in order to start addressing and finding the good solutions that actually target the problem that we have. And I don't think we have that yet, and this is a very important challenge to address.
I think, you know, being working mothers, Dr. Sara, yourself and I, we do understand that working in general has its challenges.
Yes, of course.
But I think diplomatic sphere is a niche, and it has its own intricacies makes the challenges perhaps a bit different than the challenges women have in other.
Obviously.
Spheres.
I mean, being a working mom is hard on anyone, regardless of which career you're in or where you work. But if you add the traveling part, and if you add the fact that you're going to be abroad for extended periods of time, and you know, you need to find schools and doctors and dentists, and if your kids need something, you know, support. I mean, it's a whole, you know, it's a whole new life that you're offering them, and then to have to do that every few years, it's hard on anyone, right?
And I think we need to humanize that aspect, the moving part, you know, that you're packing up your bags, you're packing up your whole life and leaving to a new country. So you've mentioned a few of these challenges. How can the UAE government overcome these challenges to better position itself as a gender inclusive and WPS champion? But before answering that question, sorry, Sara, I'm adding yet another question. Can you give us some background on the current engagement of the UAE with the WPS agenda?
Okay, why don't I start with that last question, and then we can address the solutions at the end. So, look, I don't think, to be very honest with you, I don't think that the UAE needs to do much to be a WPS champion. I think it already is. Again, if you look around you and if you look at what other countries in the region are doing, it's very obvious that the UAE is ahead of the curve, especially when it comes to the WPS agenda. As you know, the UAE is a non-permanent member on the Security Council and has been since 2021 and will be for the next couple of months. So, and they have been very vocal about WPS being a foreign policy priority and a foreign policy objective for the UAE. And this is something that's guided their work on the United Nations Security Council. You know, if you look, for example, at the priorities of the UAE during the 78th UN General Assembly, that obviously started in September 2023, women empowerment in international peace and security was one of the 6 objectives that the UAE listed for itself for this year. So you see how this is a running theme. And it's not just something that the UAE talks about, it's something that it practices and it pushes very hard at the United Nations. If you look at, for example, how much money the UAE has allocated for WPS-related activities, since 2013 until today, we estimate that there's more than $60 to $65 million that have been allocated to actually implement the WPS agenda through different venues and different initiatives. The most important and the most notable one being the Sheikha Fatma bint Mbarak Initiative for Women, Peace and Security, which is in partnership with the General Women's Union and the UN Women Liaison Office in Abu Dhabi, and MOFA is also a part of that. And that initiative alone has trained more than 500 women cadets from the Middle East, from Africa, from Asia, to be better female peacekeepers, because we don't have enough women peacekeepers, we don't train women peacekeepers enough, and so the UAE is actually championing that by bringing hundreds of women peacekeepers every year to Abu Dhabi and training them for a few months on different things, including combat and non-combat operations. And if you remember, Shamma, last year we actually hosted the peacekeepers exactly at the Academy for a day, and we trained them on different skills. So that's a very, that's a very concrete example of the UAE's commitment to women being better trained as women peacekeepers in the field. And it's taken that role very, very seriously. We established a Center of Excellence for WPS in 2021, for example, so that more research and more trainings can be done on the topic. We were the first country to actually have a national action plan for WPS in 2021, and it's an action plan that covers all the UAE's initiatives until 2024. And that's obviously not mentioning, for example, I will mention, but the fact that the UAE is a very serious WPS champion. It co-hosts a lot of events and initiatives and conferences and panel discussions all over the world on that topic too. So the WPS agenda is or has become a foreign policy priority for the government, and you see that cascaded down all the way to what we do at the Academy, for example. I am now teaching a course on women in development in one of our master's programs, and a very big focus of the course is on WPS. And this is the first time that we ever do that at the Academy, but I think it's also one of the first, if not the first course that's ever offered on that topic, on WPS in the UAE. So you can see how this is cascaded down all the way to education, to training, to awareness. And we give a lot of these sessions on that here as well. So these are just a few examples that I wanted to throw out there, but when I said that, I actually forgot the first half of your question. So I can't remember what you asked.
Yeah, that's my fault. I keep asking very long questions.
You asked about solutions.
Yes,
solutions. Yes.
How can the UAE government overcome the challenges that you mentioned previously?
Okay.
Yeah.
So look, I mean, as I said, it's not like we have a lot of challenges that we need to overcome. We're not talking about, the UAE is not a country that has no women diplomats, right? So we're talking about a country that is highly committed to gender balance and women empowerment and equal representation everywhere. But as I said, we don't see that gender balance in the more senior posts. And this is where I think we need the quickest action or the quickest fix. At the risk of stating the obvious, we need to appoint more women ambassadors, right? Yeah. So if we want to reach the world average, which I mentioned is 21%, we need more women ambassadors, and this is basically key. There's no other way to say this, right? So, and you need to have, we need to have that conversation, and we need to say, look, if you want a gender balanced ambassadorial corps, you need to have more women. That's the easiest fix. But I would also argue that you need to have more women appointed everywhere, not just in Europe. So for very obvious reasons, a lot of women ambassadors are posted in Europe. And I think that this is all across the board. It's not just obviously a UAE only feature. It's a feature that we see everywhere. But we also need to break that Europe stereotype. So we need more women ambassadors appointed to Asian and African countries and Latin American countries. And I think that will give the UAE an edge, right? When they can say that, not only are we appointing more women ambassadors, but we're also appointing them to countries where you don't normally see a lot of women ambassadors. And that could be a very, very good starting point. And then, as I mentioned earlier, look, we need to research retention challenges, and we need to keep track of, why are diplomats leaving the diplomatic corps? We need to understand why, and when we have a better picture of why this is happening and what are some of their concerns, that's when you can start to actually outline specific policies to address those concerns. Implementing policies for spousal employment and family integration is very important. How do you address the fact that a lot of married women diplomats are living abroad alone without their husbands, and this is not sustainable for anyone, for any sort of family. So what help are we offering them? What policies are we putting forward to help families integrate and reunite while abroad? I think coaching and training and mentorship programs go a long way for women, by women. They can help, more senior women diplomats who have been there, done that, as we say, can really become, very good, coaches and trainers, and can help answer questions. And if they spent years abroad, especially if they have kids and families, they can answer very simple questions. How do you, for example, I don't know, what's the easiest way to find a school? How do you make that family transition? How do you talk to your kids about moving abroad every few years? So female diplomats that have been in that position can answer these questions, and formalizing those sort of conversations into these sort of training and coaching programs, I think, can be very helpful. So I think that if we do all of this, or if we start implementing those solutions, and I have to emphasize here that it all needs to start with researching retention challenges and understanding, you know, that first, and then addressing and coming up with solutions to address that problem. If we start there, I think that in a few years, it's going to be an even better picture than what it already is.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sara, for the insightful chat. We have, I think, been able to get a better picture of the general challenges that women still face, although we've come a long way, but some of the challenges that women still face today, the emphasis on the need for research specifically on retention rates, and how the UAE has actually positioned itself as a champion or a success story for with the WPS agenda. So we have been able to cover these topics and much more. So we do thank you very much for this very insightful session, and I hope this will not be the last.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amma, for your questions. And yeah, let's keep the conversation going, and hopefully we can, you know, maybe in a few months sit, you know, again and talk again and see if some of these challenges have been addressed, and if we can, you know, talk of better percentages and more women being appointed soon. That would definitely be a good follow-up to this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you for listening. This episode is presented by the Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy. The Academy offers accredited educational and training programs dedicated to preparing future diplomats and leaders in the government and private sectors. The Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy combines a unique institutional approach with diplomacy, academic programs, and research. You can learn more by visiting www.agda.ac.ae.